We tend to tell ourselves we have to do the research first. And I say, no, write the story first, then research the things you need. It's fine to be reading about the culture that you're writing in, for instance, or the period, but don't start studying the details of how cabins are on ships if it turns out none of your characters get within 100 miles of the sea, right? It might be interesting, but it won't be useful. The story is going to occur independently, and then you do the world building to emphasize and illustrate the story. So go ahead and write the story, put a little square brackets and saying, you need to find out if such a thing actually existed. Go on. Now, how much to put in, which is one of the ways to know when you're done, depends on which audience you're writing for. And I won't go on and on about this, but basically there are two audience groupings. And of course, individual people read both. But in science fiction, I called one side rubber suit science fiction and the other side kitchen sink science fiction. In fantasy, I call it medieval inns and McCastles, fantasy or historical, and whole new culture. It's a spectrum. But using the rubber suits, there are folks who they want their science fiction to actually be simple. Westerns in space, detective stories in space, melodramas in space. And they want everything to be just like it is now with one cool gadget. And the original Star Trek was pretty much like this. There were aliens and they were interesting, but they were people in rubber suits. And there were the four science fiction devices of Star Trek in every episode, and that was about it. And those readers they want to be intrigued, but they don't want to be challenged. They are reading for relaxation, typically. They don't want to have to rethink the culture. And then there's the folks who they want to be immersed in someplace completely different. And so with rubber suit medieval inn folks, you want the one thing that you're going to focus on, the one world building nexus, and that's pretty much it. You don't want to overdo. So if you're starting to work on your third one, you've gone too far. For the more immersive folks, the first thing you want to do is not start at the beginning, but start in the middle. Drop them into the whatever it is. Have a lot of stuff going by that's interesting, but you don't explain, but you convince them they're in a whole different world, and then show them crucial things at intervals so the world keeps kind of growing on them as you're world building. With that set of folks, it can be easy to just get lost in adding things. And the way to know that you're not helping is if you're not adding meaning. If you're just coming up with another cool description, it's time to quit. Only if you're adding plot complexity in an interesting way or meaning should a thing be in there.
So I'm guessing that like Tolkien would be an example of the second one. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, he was immersive, but he was also very careful in how he revealed the world. He did it one step at a time. The hobbits are an English village with like two interesting details. And then somebody passes through and that's interesting and we deal with that. And then, okay, we're going to have to we need to go on this expedition and, oh, there are going to be actual elves. And we have an interaction with elves and the world gets bigger. And then we move along and the world gets bigger. But it was done stage by stage, not pouring it all on top of you. And one of the things with people thinking of Tolkien is we think of all the research he did, all the world building he did that he didn't put in the book. And we imagine that it's in the book, and it's not. No, what's in the book is the flavor of it. Because he knew all that stuff, he wrote with authority about what wasn't being shown. You knew there was something big over that mountain ridge, but he didn't have time to tell you, so you never found out. But you knew it was there, right? And weak writing implies there's nothing beyond the mountain if you haven't been told. It's that authority comes from believing what you've put in your book or put in your story. And that's a real key.